What's up, everybody? Deadwolf here with another one, this time bringing you top 10 true scary historical events that were not taught in school. And if you like crazy shit from history like I do, just sit down and watch this shit and get used to it. Let's go. Shout out to top 10.
History teachers everywhere have way too much material to pick from, and I'm sure depending on what country you live in, your history curriculum is going to be a lot different from someone else's. Well, fear not, because today we are going to be doing a part 2, from the terrible deaths of some historical figures to a horrifying prohibition practice, all the way to a New York City factory fire. Today we are going to be diving into 10 more true scary historical events. Before I dive into this video, you guys, I want to remind you that Lindsay Ivan is starting her own reaction channel called Peach. Make sure you head over there, subscribe, check out the brand new channel, and make sure you show her some love. Alright, let's get into our list. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Heraclitus of Ephesus. Heraclitus of Ephesus was an ancient Greek philosopher who helped push the notion that the universe is in constant change, as well as the unity of opposites, where the universe is a system of balanced exchanges. This is all fine and well, but where things get troublesome is in his own personal life. Heraclitus was a misanthrope, and his dislike for humankind led him to having long stretches where he was quite isolated. He would wander through the wilderness alone, surviving on plants and other things that he could scavenge. In the end, he came down with a pretty terrible and painful illness called dropsy, which is an accumulation of fluid underneath the skin. Doctors were unfortunately unable to help him, so he took matters into his own hands. He decided to cover himself in cow dung under the belief that as it dried, it would draw the moisture out from under his skin. This could have been a genius idea, albeit super gross, but things took a very, very dark turn. Covered in the dung, he laid out in the sun to dry, but the dung created a body cast and it left him unable. This inability to move also left him unable to shoo off the pack of wild dogs that ended up surrounding him. So, unfortunately, he was eaten alive. I guess I can understand why this one may have just been left out of history class. In our number 9 spot today, we have Kurt Gödel. The Austrian-American philosopher and mathematician Kurt Gödel lived from 1906 to 1978, and he made quite a name for himself. Being compared to the likes of Aristotle and Einstein, he is best known for his incompleteness theorem, which was a very significant mathematical result. He was obviously very successful and found himself teaching and educating a younger generation, but similar to who we just talked about, his personal life is where things got quite dark. When he was 6 years old, he had a case of rheumatic fever, which left him quite ill for the rest of his childhood. This led him to first being pretty preoccupied with his health, and unfortunately this turned into hypochondria, which then led him down a path of complete paranoia. He ended up having an irrational fear of getting poisoned, so to avoid this he would only eat food that had been prepared by his wife, who also had to taste it beforehand. Sadly, his wife was hospitalized in 1977 for 6 months, which obviously left her unable to prepare food for him. I'm not exactly sure why he couldn't just prepare the food himself, but during this period he refused to eat, which eventually led to him starving to death. In our number 8 spot today, we have prohibition poisoning. I'm sure most of us learned about the prohibition at some point in school, which of course was the outlaw of the consumption of alcohol, which was done with a ban being placed on the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcohol by the US government from 1920 to 1933, but it is just as well known that this ban certainly did not stop people from producing or consuming alcohol. It was just done in sneakier ways. The black market for alcohol was booming as people began to drink redistilled industrial alcohol instead. This is all pretty well. A thing that is definitely less well known is
Twisted Tea Hard Iced Tea is made with real brewed tea. We're so real, we use real fans as hand models. Twisted Tea Hard Iced Tea. Keep it real, keep it twisted.
is something that government agencies agencies did to curb the black market sales of alcohol. Basically, they poisoned the industrial alcohol that was being repurposed for drinking. And not just poisoned in a way where the drinker would get sick, which is already horrendous enough, but they poisoned the alcohol with lethal chemicals. It is thought that by the time the prohibition ended, at least 10,000 people died from this. This event is still one of the strangest and deadliest decisions made by government officials. In our number 7 spot today, we have King Charles VI. King Charles VI started off his reign by being very well loved and respected, but as time went on, over his 4 decades of ruling, he ended up being known as Charles the Mad. His erratic behavior had him hacking up knights, imagining that he was St. George, and he would also have bouts of amnesia where he would be able to recognize some people, but not his wife and children. This is all very strange and of course quite sad, as he was very obviously exhibiting signs of extreme mental illness, but one of the strangest symptoms was him believing that he was made of glass. He was terribly frightened of falling or being jostled too hard, and he would actually insert iron rods into his clothing to try and keep from shattering. But then he would also apparently run wild at top speeds throughout the halls of the castle or the streets, which would obviously mean he was totally abandoning his fear of fragility. It apparently got so bad that he had to be held inside with the entrances bricked up. Sadly, he continued on this path until he passed away in 1422. In our number 6 spot today, we have the sticky bomb. Okay, so this one is less of an event and more of just a historical invention that absolutely should not have existed, and that is the sticky bomb. After the British hurriedly evacuated in 1940, they were facing the threat of German invasion and had to come up with some weapons that could be used against tanks. Thus, the sticky grenade or sticky bomb was born. It was formerly called the anti-tank hand grenade number 74, and basically the design was that there was a metal outer shell that covered a bomb coated in adhesive. The idea was to have the user pull a pin to remove the metal casing, where they could then run up to a tank, use the sticky adhesive to stick it to the tank, activate the 5-second fuse, and get the heck out of there, or you could just throw it and hope it stuck. Well, there's a few problems with this design. The first one being that I'm sure all of us can understand, the adhesive didn't want to stick to anything dusty or wet or muddy, which are all things that happen to be common to tanks. You know what they did like to stick to though? Human skin. Unfortunately, this invention could prove much more detrimental to the person who was attempting to use it. Despite these very obvious and dangerous flaws, it was still used by a few different armed forces, but I don't think anyone has used it in recent history, which is truthfully for the best. In our number 5 spot today, we have Bikini Island. Bikini Island is located within the Marshall Islands, and it once was the home of around 170 islanders. In 1940, the U.S. president at the time, Harry Truman, ordered that the military test their nuclear weapons in the case of a future where they would be deemed necessary, since World War II had just ended and people were of course feeling very concerned about what the future would hold. Since Bikini was located in a place where ships and planes didn't normally travel very close to, unfortunately it was the spot chosen for this testing site. The residents of the island were asked to vacate for the good of all mankind and to end all world wars, to which they of course obliged, under the impression that they would one day be able to move back. After this, the testing began, and in 1954, the U.S. military detonated Castle Bravo, which is one of the most powerful weapons at 15 megatons. There were 22 other weapons that were detonated on this island as well, so it's safe to say that this place got a ton of nuclear activity, which left it with extremely high levels of radiation. This left residents unable to return for much longer than anticipated, first returning in the 70s. But of course, shortly after these poor people moved back, they realized that the island still had totally unsafe levels of radiation, making it still unfit to live on, which has left it still uninhabited. In our number 4 spot today, we have Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was a deputy to the ruler of the Mali Empire.
Hi, it's Tara J, and today we're at a high-end residential construction site in Long Island, New York, and there's something new and very exciting they're installing here. Now, what makes this house so special and different is that here they've installed the air diffuser of the future. Envy Air seamless architectural air diffusers. These are amazing, and I'm about to tell you why. Envy Air diffusers are brand new and have tons of advantages over those old metal vents. Proprietary technology allows Envy Air diffusers to blend seamlessly into ceilings and create a clean look. It's a one-of-a-kind design that has never been accomplished before. They add aesthetic value instead of just being an unsightly necessity. This house is under construction, so some of these diffusers still need to be cleaned up. Hey Daniel, what are you doing up there?
I'm up here checking out this NVAir access door.
Tell me about that panel itself.
This one's an access door that's not finished yet. When it's done, it will be seamlessly integrated into the ceiling. Interior designers and architects love them because they're so much better to look at than your standard metal access doors.
So that opens up?
While it looks the same as a diffuser and the return grill, the access door opens up just like this.
Very cool. But what about condensation? NVAir diffusers utilize an innovative smart composite material that has a low response to temperature change. This material allows for a 95% reduction in condensation over those standard metal vents. What that means is less of those water droplets falling on your head or on the floor. Here's something cool. You can also integrate LED lighting into NVAir diffusers like this. There's also another big advantage if you like peace and quiet. When it comes to noise, how do these diffusers perform?
Unlike your standard metal grills and diffusers, the NVAir is made of a composite material that absorbs sound and significantly reduces unwanted noise levels.
NVAir diffusers are not just for high-end homes. They can be installed in commercial spaces and hospitality properties. In fact, they're already installed in hotels in Florida and New Orleans. They're fully customizable when it comes to shape, size, slot thickness, and slot angle, and can be retrofitted into an existing space too. Total flexibility. NVAir diffusers are designed and manufactured to exacting standards in the United States in Brooklyn, New York. Until next time.
But when the ruler went missing while on a sea voyage to find the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, Mansa Musa became the ruler in 1312. During his rule, European nations were really struggling due to civil wars and a lack of resources, but the Mali Empire was flourishing because of their abundance of resources like gold and salt. Under his rule, the empire grew to take up a large portion of West Africa as he conquered 24 cities and their surrounding districts. At the time, Mali was one of the top producers of gold in the entire world, which left Mansa Musa as one of the wealthiest historical figures ever. One of the most well-known events during his rule was his pilgrimage to Mecca. This journey took place from 1324 to 1325, and it spanned an estimated 4,000 miles, and it was the first time people outside of the empire saw just how wealthy he was. He traveled with 60,000 of his men, all wearing Persian silk, along with 12,000 slaves who each carried 4 pounds of gold bars, and he brought heralds who had golden staffs, along with a bunch of camels and horses. This pilgrimage had a profound effect on Egypt as this huge group of people passed through. From the markets in Cairo to the royals to the impoverished people that crossed their path, Musa left Cairo littered with so much gold that it depreciated the value of the metal in Egypt, and it took decades for them to recover. That's kind of just a whole mess. But like, we talk about like Napoleon and Alexander the Great and all the things that they did, and I've literally never heard of this guy before, and he's like one of the best conquerors, most successful conquerors of all time. Seems suspicious. In our number 3 spot today, we have the hostage crisis. In 1980, America saw Ronald Reagan win the presidential election over the former president, Jimmy Carter, but there was a crisis going on that was taking the attention of Americans everywhere. The Iran hostage crisis is well known in American history, and it began on November 4th, 1979, when 52 American diplomats and citizens were held hostage after a group of militarized Iranian college students took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The 444 days these Americans were held hostage is something I'm sure a lot of Americans learned about at some point or another, but the release of the hostages is what sometimes gets a little more murky in the history books. The hostages were released on January 20th, 1981, which was the day that Reagan was inaugurated. There were people who believed that the hostages were released because Reagan was simply just more powerful than Jimmy Carter. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that Reagan